Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show. Hong Kong Confidential is brought to you by Teresa's Turkish Towels. Teresa imports the finest 100% Turkish cotton towels that dry very quickly, making them perfect for Hong Kong's humid climate. Say goodbye to the traditional smelly and stinky towels and try the colourful and fresh selections available online or in Teresa's Wan Chai store. Use the promo code CONFIDENTIAL online or mention this podcast when you visit in person to receive $100 off your entire order when you order 2 or more towels. With 100% satisfaction guaranteed or your money back, the only thing you've got to lose are the musty smells that permeate traditional terry towels. Visit www.hkturkish.com in order to get the address and directions to Teresa's semi-hidden location. A warning for our listeners. In this podcast, we discuss the issues of sexual harassment, abuse, and child abuse. So please consider this before you continue on. Today I'm here with Karina Calver again. Hi, Karina. So
Hi
nice
there.
to see you.
It's lovely to be back.
Karina, I interviewed you back in the early days of the podcast, and you were episode 7, Just a Girl, where we talked about your experiences with being abused by your father for many years. And I understand that that has led you on to being a front runner and a leader in the Me Too campaign that's been going on in Hong Kong. Tell me a little bit about what you've been doing since I met you last time.
Sure. So I've worked with a few organizations, Embrace Worldwide, the University of Hong Kong, Camel Assembly, and another psychologist, Pascal. And we've collaborated and started a monthly series where we're basically calling it a Me Too Now What campaign. And it started with just inviting women to understand what sexual harassment is, learning how to identify it, and responding to sexual harassment at the workplace. And then we had a follow-up series where we included men. So just to have their take on what's going on and how they notice or relate to sexual harassment. And I'm really excited because we're having one coming up very soon, actually, which will be just for the Indian community.
Great. And of course, for our listeners out there, you're Cindy. Is that
That's right. I'm Cindy.
Yeah.
And so this is a big part of what I'm really proud of because I really want to tap into the Indian community just to have them understand what sexual harassment is, assault is, and rape is. And to be able to educate their children about body safety and the effects of sexual harassment or sexual assault. So that's going to happen sometime next month.
Oh, congratulations. That's
Thank you.
Brilliant. So you've really been moving forward in a very fast way. Was that the first time, our podcast last time, was that the first time you've ever spoken publicly about the abuse you'd suffered?
I've done a few articles about it, about my experience. I believe I did one with Huffington Post and another one on an Indian publication. And that was years ago.
Oh, great.
But I didn't really do much from there on. I just kind of let it be. Maybe it wasn't the right time. But coincidentally, and also because I'm trained as a counselor, it just felt right to now do more for the community, to make this a bigger movement, because I realized a lot more women out there, and men included, who've suffered in some shape or form in terms of sexual harassment or assault. So I felt the need to have them acknowledge what's going on, let them know that this is something that they should speak about and get help. And so hence this movement.
I was at the Me Too campaign, your second one. It was really amazing. That was the one where the men were included.
That's right.
Here's a little snippet from that campaign.
So this for me is an important project because I'm quite passionate about, gender equality and also about students and, making sure that we prepare our graduates for the workplace, okay? So tonight I'm only going to speak for a few minutes before I hand the discussion over to the panel, and then later on there'll be a chance to do some real group discussion, because really this is the venue that we're trying to create, a safe space where you can discuss anything you want to with respect to sexual harassment, whether you've been a victim or whether you've experienced it or whether you've seen it or you witnessed it. Then this is a place where you can talk. Feel free to express your thoughts. It's a safe place. No one's judgmental. We're not just interested in talking about the problems, although that is an important thing. We're also much more interested in the solutions. And it's certainly in the research that I've done, there's a lot telling us what it is like, what's happening out there, but very little and very thin on what we need to do about it, or what can we do about it. And that's the harder part. And in all the studies that I've looked at, it's very heavy on the what is it and what's happened, and very light on the, okay, well now that that's happened, this is what we're going to do. And this is something that we're working on at the university as well to help students. But tonight, this is about you, and this is about us sharing.
That was Professor Helen Lockie from HKU, and she was one of the lead organisers and presenters of the second Me Too conference. How do you think that it was received, having the men and women come together, and what do you feel the vibe was at that event?
Well, I felt like I heard that some men were really amazed that this platform is there and what they thought of the event in itself, and they definitely feel like there's a start for them to understand how we feel. So I know that it was taken in a really positive light, and hence we want to do this on a monthly basis. I know that it's helped a lot of people identify with their own sort of the subtleness of what's going on, how to identify and respond to such things. So I know that it was definitely useful.
Do you think that the men who came, they were people who had wives, sisters, or, family members who had suffered abuse, or they were just supporters of the whole program and really sort of a part of the It's Time campaign? Or do you think they suffered sexual abuse themselves, or do you think there was a whole mixture?
I think it's a whole mixture, but I don't personally have those stacks because it's another person, Keisha from Kamala's Assembly, who actually put all that together. So I think they had more information, but I, as a counselor, was just there to sort of bring my light or my expertise in that area.
So it's interesting to note, now you're going to do this Me Too campaign with the Indian community. You're obviously interested in the way that different cultures view sexual harassment and how they respond to it. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you've learned about that since you've started this work?
Okay. One thing I do know, and I think it's not just with the Indian community, but I think across the world, across different cultures, that there's a huge shame in terms of coming into acknowledging what's going on. Shame with the family, shame with being okay about sharing what's happened. Fear of the reputation or, losing your reputation, what people will say, the whole gossip thing. So I think that plays a big role in them keeping quiet or even denying what happened. And I feel that's why there's a need to have a Me Too event for the Indian community to let them know that, that so much is going on in India. In Hong Kong, we can't pretend this doesn't exist because we know it happens here too, and we need to start acknowledging it and being okay with the fact that it doesn't matter about this whole shame and reputation thing, because we need to be true to ourselves and be able to heal and let children know that this is something that they can talk about if they are going through something like that.
Is there a difference between sexual assault and sexual abuse?
No. I think sexual assault is basically everything besides the actual penetration, right? Whereas abuse is just any sort of wrong treatment. So it's a misuse or being inflicted in a wrong way. So that's kind of the big umbrella. But assault really just means anything inappropriate touching other than penetration.
Right, thanks for clarifying that.
Sure.
And do you feel like the Indian community or India itself has a lot of this going on, and that it's really endemic in the culture and something that it's not spoken about?
I think so. I mean, I'm glad it's now being spoken about a bit more in India. I'm not sure how much is being spoken about here, but the very fact that I got 40 odd responses when I first pitched it with the community in Hong Kong over Facebook. Initially, I thought no one's going to respond. When I had so many people say, yeah, we're interested, and started private messaging me and stuff like that, it's clear that it's time. It really is time where people want to address it. They're brave enough to talk about it. And I think that's really good. You can see that change. So yes, I do think that for decades, centuries, it's been something that we're afraid to talk about. And I think it boils down to the fact that we're so ashamed of whether we'll be heard, what will happen to the family, what will happen to our reputation, because we're so governed by how we're perceived by our community. And especially when Hong Kong is so small, our community and our reputation means more than anything, that I think talking about it is such a fearful fact.
And it's really interesting because we're in a culture here, the Chinese culture, have that whole face thing. And so from my understanding of face is that you hide the issues that cause shame and you push them to the side.
That's right.
And part of overcoming shame and dealing with these issues is talking about them. That's the first step, isn't it?
Exactly. So when you talk about it, you actually are okay about whether or not it seems shameful, because you're going beyond that. So you're no longer obviously in denial, and you're able to go away from the whole stigma of what this could be perceived by community, and you're willing to acknowledge the truth. And I think that's a really strong, courageous step.
And you're an example of somebody who has done all of that, addressed the issue, spoken about it, had support and therapy, overcome your shame and healed from it, and now you're helping others. So you're a real role model for anyone out there who's just at the beginning of this journey.
Yeah, well, I hope to be that, and that's my inspiration. But I think because I've gone through it, I know that it's nothing more than a step towards not just only healing, but being the best version of yourself. Because I do feel that when we are stuck in that shame or stuck in that denial, we can't really live the best version of ourselves. We can't really live a true productive life and being in touch with all our emotions. And I feel that's why it's really important to be able to have this platform where people can talk about it openly in that safe zone, where they can address these issues and at the same time educate their children. Because that's, again, the most important thing is kids can grow up knowing about body safety, knowing about consent, knowing about what is right or wrong, because we don't know who and when this can happen too, you know what I mean? So when kids are equipped with that kind of information, we can hopefully prevent this from happening again.
So is part of what you're doing working on prevention, working on healing and attacking the issue head on, and also looking at cultural differences and ways of reporting or what to do once you've actually come to terms with speaking up? Is that right?
Yes, partly. I think with the next Me Too event, what we're hoping to address is that we're having a panel of people like we did in the previous one. And this time around, we're having someone to talk about body safety. We're having Rebecca on board. And so the idea is so that they understand that not only are we dealing with the impacts of sexual harassment or sexual abuse, we're also talking about how we can prevent it, or how we can educate, rather, our children so they understand what personal space is, who can touch your body and when. So when you're a kid, when you're bathing, mommy should really ask you, do you want me to help you with that? Things like that. So they understand that they should get permission, and so when next time, or if ever rather, if someone touches them inappropriately, that should ring an alarm bell for the child.
That gives them the language to use to speak up and ask for help and tell people if something's going wrong. And they can also learn that they can have permission to say no to adults or people in authority. So you're doing all this preventative work. How do you think the idea of honour is related to child and adult abuse?
Going back to what I just said, right? It really boils down to the fact that we're so caught up in making sure our reputation is intact, that we're being perceived a certain way, that becomes more important than dealing with the abuse. So I think we're so afraid of the shame that will come from speaking the truth that we'd rather just put it under the rug and pretend everything's okay. And I think that's very true, I personally feel, for the Indian community, because we're such a small community that we rather just have this smile, get all dolled up, be at parties, but not really talk about what's going on, whether abuse or not, any problems for that matter. And I think that's really sad, because identifying is one of the most important things, so you can actually work towards healing, work towards being okay. But I think because we're so afraid of how we're being perceived, that we rather just not honor ourselves, but just keep up with that reputation.
Yeah, that pretense that everything's fine.
Exactly.
Do you think that some cultures value honour more than others? And do you think that these issues are spoken less about in some cultures than other cultures?
I can't speak for other cultures, but I think that definitely for Chinese community, this is a big thing, face. It's very similar to Indian community. I mean, the very fact that I just found out recently, I was just doing some research, and most of the victims who are being assaulted are usually people they know, right? And that's over 90%. This is for India. 90% of the offenders are people they know. So it makes it even more clear as to why they wouldn't want to report it, because then it's like, it's shaming my own family. It's shaming people I know. It could be a cousin or whatever. And so they feel an association with that because it's my blood. So rather just put it under the rug. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's a similar concept with even Chinese people, because reputation and honoring the name is so more important than dealing with anything emotional or a trauma-related incident. So no, let's not deal with that. Let's just keep the good face and pretend everything's okay.
It seems to me from the Me Too campaign and all of these celebrities that have been coming forward, and the fact that it's been spoken about so much recently in the press, that that's really allowed people to speak up and get courage. You know, they think if that person who I admire has gone through it, then I can actually talk about what I've been through and get some help. Do you think that that's really starting to enable people to speak up and get help?
Oh, definitely. I think it's a great blessing that the Weinstein thing happened. Sad that it did, but good in the sense that it's allowing people to speak up now and be a little more brave about it. And I think it's harder for the Asian community because of the whole reputation and keeping up that family name. But at the same time, there is that shift, especially we see in Hong Kong. And I think that's huge. I mean, you look at South China Morning Post, every other day, you're seeing some story being out there because of some form of sexual assault. And I think the fact that they're even coming out and sharing their story, that's huge.
So it's like it's getting the ball rolling. I saw an article that you were in the South China Morning Post on these Me Too programs that you're running. And also, when I went to the seminar, I was really astounded at how many people were there. There was a really good turnout, wasn't it?
Yeah. And what's interesting is I'm starting to see a lot of Asians coming to...
That's what I was just going to say. There were quite a lot of Asian people there.
Yeah.
And certainly younger people who want to sort of perhaps even, I don't want to say change the culture because that's a bit presumptuous.
Yeah.
But they want to at least speak out about what they're experiencing and look for ways of getting support, because sexual assault, if it's happened to you, is going to affect you in some way, whether it be intense or a small amount. It's just going to be there, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think just understanding, sometimes it might not be an harassment, but you want to just get an input to understand what it was. And I think an event like this, when they're able to share that in a safe environment and be able to talk about it, it clears their doubts and gives them a bit of more tools to go back and learn how to deal with it. Because sometimes it's not just about telling that person off and coming across maybe too feminist or coming across as anti-men, but just knowing how to work with that person. It could be your boss, it could be a colleague. And I think that's what the whole event is about, is to give people a platform, not just to share, but to go back and find ways to respond to a situation. Because we want to ultimately make women empowered to deal with situations, but at the same time also not seem like they're pushing men away. Do you know what I mean? So finding ways to talk about it is really important, and finding a way to address it with the person before, instead of going to HR, taking a drastic measure. I mean, sometimes it's important, but first I feel it's really important to talk to the person, to the offender, if it is an offender.
And let them know how they're affecting you.
Exactly. Because I think if you don't do that, then they might not even be aware. Like, I think a lot of times the offender might not even know what they're doing, because it could have been they've been brainwashed, they were assaulted. I mean, there's so much we don't know. And I think bringing that to their attention is, I feel personally, is the first most important thing. And then if that's been ignored, then you can take the next necessary step.
How does somebody know if they are being sexually harassed? What qualifies sexual harassment?
Okay, so it differs from person to person. I feel there's a personal space that's been invaded, right? And if you feel like someone's come too close to your personal space and you're not comfortable, it depends on where this is. So if it's a workplace and if it's your supervisor, he's come into your personal space and you don't like it, obviously you can move back a little bit. And if he's leaning over your desk or computer, whatnot, you can sort of move away and give him that thing he needs, a computer, for instance. But if it's a colleague and you're in the same position, then I feel you can address it and say, hey, you know what? I'm not sure I like this. Like, do you mind sort of moving a little bit away? Finding words and ways to talk about it without seeming aggressive. And I think that's, the tone is really important. But if it's someone like your friend, it's even easier, right? Because you'd be like, hey, you know what, buddy? I don't like that. Can you just back off a little bit? Because it doesn't make me feel good. I don't feel comfortable. So it really depends on who is doing it and how you approach it without seeming angry or aggressive. And I think that's fundamental.
That's step number one, isn't it?
Indeed.
And I think your point is, if you're not comfortable and it's making you feel like you don't want to be in that situation, then you need to speak up.
Yeah, you need to address it if you're not comfortable. And I think whatever the other person's intent is, we can't know, but you can normally suss out. But if you're not sure and you don't feel good, you need to voice out. But it's how you voice out, that's the most important thing. And I always feel like, don't come across being aggressive. Always make sure that you let the person know calmly, but clearly and firmly that this wasn't okay.
And you can see a counsellor or speak to somebody first to get those skills and find the words to address it. You don't have to do that alone.
Yeah, and that's why we have these free events for people to come. And it's open to everyone to come and find out what the toolbox is, which we share, and then they can sort of try it out. If they're going through an experience like that, try it out and see if it works. And if they still need more help, they can come to myself, they can come to Pascal, and we actually provide these kind of techniques in our one-to-one sessions.
That's awesome. And we'll give your details at the end of the podcast. What role do you think Stockholm Syndrome plays in reporting child sexual abuse?
Okay. Well, Stockholm Syndrome is really when it actually happens when you've been kidnapped, right? And because you've been kidnapped for so long and somehow you've been brainwashed into feeling you will care for or love the person who kidnapped you, right? And there's this kind of syndrome also takes place if you're being raped when you were a child. Because what happens is if this is someone you know and who's in some way cared for you or used ways to make you feel safe as a manipulation to then sexually harass you or assault you, then you get all blurred and therefore you start feeling a little more like love or care for that person. And that's where it's confusing because you don't actually love that person, but you think you do because of what they've done. Like they've shown care, but at the same time, they've also sort of taken advantage and, like raped you or assaulted you. So that's where Stockholm Syndrome comes in.
Do you think because of people having that Stockholm Syndrome that they're less likely to then report what's going on?
Exactly, because they're confused into what's really taken place. They feel that they couldn't report that person, but that person isn't bad. Like they did care for me. There's that justification story. They've cared for me. They've loved me. They didn't mean to do that. You kind of justified in all twisted ways, and therefore you wouldn't report. Yeah, and there is that problem.
In your work, you're a trauma counsellor, is that correct?
That's right, and relationship too.
Okay, so you see a lot of people who have had these kind of experiences. How do you feel that adults cope with child abuse and how does it affect their lives?
Wow, in so many ways. Some people actually, many of them deny what happened. And if they don't deny it, if they're okay with what happened in the sense that they've come into terms with what happened, they'll intellectualize it. So they think by intellectualizing it, they've actually dealt with the issue and it's quite different.
Can you explain to me what you mean by intellectualize it?
Sure. So when you intellectualize it, what I really mean is that in your head, you've understood what's happened. You'd be like, yeah, I know I got assaulted when I was like 8 and this happened and that happened. So you go through the events in your mind, but you haven't actually gone through the experience. What I mean by that is in your heart, you haven't gone through those emotions. And that's really important because you've then allowed your heart to heal from that scar, from that trauma. And until and unless you haven't actually gone through the 7 steps, which is really denial, anger, depression, bargaining, all of those things, you can't really heal. So you're going to be stuck at one of those zones depending on where you're at. And I feel when you've been able to step away from just using your head, but actually going through the heart, and one of the things I use is Arlene Drake's work, which is really about inner child therapy and working with your client using inner child therapy to be able to go into what happened if this was a child abuse problem.
Can you tell me a bit more about what inner child therapy is? Is that sort of regressing back to a certain age?
Yeah, so if this happened when you were a child, then what Arlene Drake does is she uses right hand, left hand approach, which really means that you use your left hand to work with your child and you actually write. So you're pretending that your left hand is that little you. And because the handwriting will not be proper, it won't be right, It's more like your imagination or reflective mind coming into play, and it brings out those sides of that emotion. And as you do this is going to be a regular process in order to get out all that was suppressed. The idea is to cultivate, to sort of bring out what was stuck, and that's a starting point in the healing.
When you were talking before about intellectualizing it, this is a way of getting in touch with the actual feelings and the emotions of the scenario or the incidents, and that is part of healing.
Yeah, that's one of the steps, because it could be like you're working with the inner child, but you also want to work with, if it's someone you know who's traumatized you, abused you, whatever, then you also want to work with that person. Maybe you felt neglect, you felt hurt. So a lot of what Arlene Drake does is she also has you do a lot of letter writing, letter writing to the person you wish was better to you and stuff like that. And it all revolves around the fact that you're trying to heal and understand from, not really understand, but you're trying to heal and write from a perspective of what you missed so that you feel more whole.
When you talk about what you missed, do you mean what you missed out as being a child? Indeed. Because you were suffering this abuse?
So like maybe you missed out on being loved by your mom, or maybe you missed out from being
happy.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and if that provider didn't give you that, then you're going to be that ideal mother or be that ideal uncle or whatever have you, and you're going to write from that place, and you're going to use your right hand because that's the hand that knows how to bring that out, and you're going to write that to that little girl who missed all that.
Oh, that's so interesting. That sounds cool.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example, without giving any names, of somebody who's been through this process and how you've seen it change them and heal them?
It's still a work in progress. So one of my clients actually going through that, and I can see some changes, but it's still very early days. So I'm not sure where it's going to go, but I'm pretty positive that it's going to come about because I've done it all myself. So,
oh, great. Yeah. Is that part of the work that you did to heal from your experience?
I mean, I went through therapy for ages, but when I was starting to pick up her work, Arlene's work, and I'm like, oh my God, this is fascinating. And I thought, let me give it a shot. Yeah, in order to work with others, I wanted to be my own guinea pig, and I thought this was brilliant. So I actually found it really empowering because it was stuff that came about that I never even thought would. I thought it was dealt with, but it's just fascinating.
So you'd done a whole bunch of work in therapy, covered loads of stuff, but even when you did this process, you had different or new or more experiences that came up.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it is. It is
fascinating. Really cool. When young children are not provided a stable, predictable, loving and supporting environment, significant developmental consequences often follow. What are these consequences, do you think?
Wow, I think definitely emotional well-being, right? Because when they're not being taken care of, when they're not being nurtured, they can grow up not feeling safe, not feeling valued, but also not feeling they're good enough. So I feel like when young children don't have a stable upbringing, a secure emotional environment to grow up in, and I think more than the physical, I think it's more the emotional stability that's lost, and I think that's really important. They'll end up having issues with trust. They'll end up not knowing what's right from wrong, whether they'll turn into the wrong company and therefore drugs and alcohol, or even just being promiscuous and not understanding what that means. I really feel that when they don't have a stable home, there's all these potential problems that will arise.
Do you think that it can make them more vulnerable to sexual abuse as well?
Yes, for sure. Because I don't think what sadly happens is you can't help but turn to just about anyone to feel loved. And when you do that, you don't even realize when there are signs of danger. And then you will go into it thinking that, okay, he probably loves me and therefore you'll be okay to it. Not knowing is actually going to turn into assault. And that by then it's a bit late. You know what I mean? So when you're not feeling secure emotionally, you go into places not knowing that there's actually potential danger for you.
Yeah.
Because you don't have the equipment and you don't have the tools to understand what is bad for me and what's good for me, because you haven't been sort of in a secure upbringing. You haven't seen love in its healthy form to understand what is bad love, so to speak.
And also you quite often don't have the tools to be able to get out of the situation, or even the self-confidence and the self-esteem to be able to address the issue and move away from it, or say no, or make changes in your lifestyle, or whatever it takes.
Yeah, and I think because, again, going back to a bit of Stockholm syndrome, right? You can't help but care for that person. Because you think, oh, he loves me, but yeah, I know he abused me, but you know what? Deep down, he loves me. He's probably going through blah, blah, blah himself. So you kind of justify all his stories. And that is really bad. But we don't even know any better because we haven't seen a healthier version of love or a healthy relationship. So we think that's okay. And we think, you know what? Yeah, but at least he loves me. You know, I'd rather have that than nothing else. So we have all these stories in our head because we don't know what's right.
That's so interesting. And it almost then becomes normal or normalized, doesn't it? Because you don't know any different.
Indeed.
And that, I imagine, having not been sexually abused, that is very common, that especially for children,
yes,
or when it happens very young. I think as adults we can perhaps know the difference.
Yes.
And certainly these conversations that are being had about these issues with the whole Me Too campaign are making it clearer to people what's acceptable and what's not, and how important it is to set boundaries, and how important it is to speak up and don't accept behaviour that makes you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why we want to start with parents. When parents start having the tools of how to talk about these things with the children can, will be raised in a way that they know what's a healthy relationship and what's not a healthy relationship. They know consent, they know permission, they know body safety, all the things that they should really know. And the moment they have all these tools, it would help them when they're older, when they do encounter something that's not what they understand to be wrong, it's easier for them to push it away. But today, when people have been assaulted when they're young, or even a later time in their life, and if they haven't these tools, they haven't been exposed to it, there is that danger of not knowing what to do and just going, okay, you know what, this is the best I can get, or, well, maybe he loves me, or whatever else, right? Because we don't know what to do with it. And we think, okay, we'll have these justification stories because we think that's just how it is. This is maybe how life is. This is how men are. Because we don't know any different. And that's where I feel what we're trying to do with the Me Too campaign is to let parents understand that we're not only wanting them to know the effects of sexual harassment or abuse, but so that they can equip their children to understand right from wrong and good relationship versus bad.
And is that what was missing from your life as a child? And is that how you got caught up in it for so long because you didn't have those skills, you didn't know right from wrong, it was normalised because you didn't know any different and he was your father?
Yep, for sure. I didn't know what healthy relationship meant. I mean, I've seen it. I had quite a few people, like my grandparents, for example, my uncle and aunt, another friend of mine, till date have one of the best relationships. But nevertheless, I still felt like I wasn't sure. I didn't really know what a healthy relationship consists of. And because deep down, like I think because I didn't have the tools myself, I didn't know what I was looking for. And I was only attracted to those that were unhealthy for me because that's what I saw in my own household.
Oh, so that's interesting. So it had a knock-on effect into future relationships as well.
Yes, I went for complete bad boys who had charm like my dad did, who, so I did exactly what I didn't need, but I didn't know any better because I didn't think I was worthy enough for good men. It affects your self-esteem, it affects your self-value, and you don't realize that you're actually just constantly going to have that ripple effect of one incident or a series of incidents that have sort of sabotaged who you are.
And if our listeners want to hear more about your personal story with your Me Too experience, they can go back and listen to episode 7, Just a Girl. Karina, what do you say? I've been reading quite a number of articles that are saying the Me Too campaign has gone too far. There are people that are making false accusations. It's hampering workplace relationships. It's making men afraid to just make normal, natural sexual advances towards women. What do you think about all of these claims?
See, the thing is that with everything, there is going to be that problem in a sense. Because right now, women are finally taking a stand. They're finally trying to find their own voice. And of course, that shift is going to take a while. Because the problem is, it may seem like it's going completely in one end, where men feel like they're being cornered. And yes, I can understand that. And that is why I feel it's important to make sure that when we say this, we're being not so much kind, but we're being clear and firm. And we're not speaking to sort of confront them in a way to push them away. And I feel that's really important. But the other thing is also this pendulum will take a while before it's centered, before women find their place in the world, because we're still coming out and we're not sure as to where we fit. And men don't know where we are in this whole equation of things because we are still not, we're coming out and trying to find ourselves in this whole process because we've been suppressed for decades, right? So it's that pendulum where we need to sort of get a hang of where we are. Does that make sense? And that's why it's going to take a while before
the dust settles.
Exactly.
And this is a really good point to mention as well, that men do have their own Me Too stories as well. And that sexual abuse is just not limited to women.
No, it's not.
And of course, there are people of all genders, gender non-binary, transgender, and men and women. So we need to acknowledge that as well. But
definitely.
Is your focus on all areas of sexual abuse, or are you working more just with women?
Generally, right now, it's more with women. I would like to branch out, but I think that's where I'm better at the moment. So once I'm more skilled at working with other genders, and other groups, I would definitely will.
That's awesome. When we talk about child abuse, there's lots of different conceptions about what does and doesn't constitute child abuse. Mm-hmm. For example, is leaving a 10-year-old at home neglect? Is spanking your child abuse? Should brothers and sisters bathe together? There's so many different things that I think are culturally different. How do we qualify and quantify these things?
Okay, I think it depends on each person and each family, but I really feel like when it comes to, let's just go into spanking first. When we go into spanking, for me, I always wonder, why would a parent do that, right? Is there no other way to deal with the situation? And also, what kind of result do you really want? Do you want the kid just to comply because you want it to? So not to have a voice, not to reason, and to have a debate over an issue? The other thing is, are you taking out your frustration onto the child? So is it about power and control? So it's really important to treat the kid as an equal. When the kid is treated as an equal, then you wouldn't spank an equal because that would take away that person's rights. So it's really important to question why you're doing what you're doing. And does it bring an overall good? Does it affect that person's self-esteem? Does it make him or her feel inadequate? So I think there's a lot of questions that a parent needs to address for themselves before they actually consider spanking.
I think that's interesting that you say treat them as an equal, because I think there'll be people out there listening going, but they're not my equal. I'm the parent, they're the child, and I guide them, I teach them, I set boundaries for them, I give them expectations, I'm helping them to learn and grow. I do understand what you're saying, but maybe the word respect is a better one than equal.
What I mean by equal is understanding in your mind that they are their own individual, while your role is still to guide, is still there to parent, but that person is an own individual. Of course, you have a huge influence over them, but your influence has to be positive for that person to grow up and have the best values, right? So if you're going to spank, you're firstly invading that person's personal space, and you're also creating a wound in that person's mind. So is that really what you want? So I feel that because that person is an individual, you need to respect that person's space and that person's being.
And there are some cultures where spanking is acceptable and, in fact, done regularly, aren't they?
Oh yeah. And I know for the fact that in the States, 2/3 of parents still believe it's okay. And I know it's happened to me, and I think everyone who's grown up has experienced some form of spanking or another. And I don't know, I never thought it taught me anything. When I was spanked, I didn't feel like this was good. Instead, I questioned, why was I spanked? But more importantly, it brought a lot of fear. And the other thing is that I don't know if parents realize, but do they want their kids to be afraid of them?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when your child is afraid of you, they won't come for you to help.
Exactly.
They will lie to you. They will hide things from you. So there's a lot of dysfunction within your relationship can come from the fact that you spank them. And I totally agree with you. Yeah. I don't think spanking should happen at all.
Yeah.
I think there are plenty of other ways that you can get the message across to your child without spanking them, whether it be time out, whether it be star charts, or marble jars, or whether it be conversations, or whether it be taking their gadgets and things they love away from them. There's loads of ways that you can get it across to your child without hitting them.
That's right. And that's what I said. It's really important to find different methods to figure out what your child will be best at in terms of understanding what's going on before you start spanking. So finding different methods to be able to communicate what you want to communicate, then to spank, so finding different ways to get that behavior changed. The spanking is really a quick way, but it doesn't bring the result you want ultimately.
And it's really a symbol of you not having control over your anger, isn't it?
Exactly.
And
you're lashing out.
Of course, if your child is putting something metal into a socket or something, maybe a little slap on the hand to frighten them so that they realise that is seriously dangerous and they can't do it again. Yeah. That's different to spanking your child. That's a controlled choice that you make to make them understand the dangers of what they're doing, especially if they're very young and they may not understand the language. But we should never underestimate how much kids understand what you say.
Exactly.
They're incredibly astute at a very, very young age.
Exactly. And I think that because they know a lot more than we understand that they know, and when we do things with not the right intention, they pick that up. You know what I mean? And I think that's the danger. It's like we think, oh, because they're little, they're not as intelligent. They actually understand. They'll know that we resulted into doing something which actually wasn't for their benefit, is because we couldn't control the situation and we just kind of got frustrated and used spanking as a method.
It was really interesting. I was walking along one day and there was a Chinese family with a little girl who was about 3 or 4 years old, and the dad was trying to get her to pass the bottle she was holding, and she was kind of playing with him and wouldn't give it to him, and he slapped her across the face and she had a big red welt on her cheek. And I saw it and I just went off like the school teacher that I am. I was just like, excuse me, how dare you? How would you like it if I slapped you? That's child abuse. You know, he was like, oh, sorry. And I don't know whether whether that would have made a difference or whether that would have stopped him from doing it in the future. But it was interesting, you know, my reaction was just like,
how could you?
Yeah, how could you? I was horrified and wanted to save the child and run away with it.
No, I totally know what you mean. And I've seen that too. And I don't get it. I personally am like, I have this belief that if you don't know how to be a parent, and I know a lot of people don't, because you learn as you go along, and I get that.
Yeah, and it's the only thing in the world you don't have to have a license for or get training for. You've got to learn how to drive a car and get a license, but you don't learn how to parent and get a license.
But the thing is that if you're not putting your child's mind, like their well-being, as the most important thing, then I think something's wrong. Like, you cannot do this just to wing it. You have to do this with the intention of bringing the best. It has to be for the best of the child. You know what I mean? And if that is being compromised, then maybe you're not right to be a parent. And I'm not a parent, so I shouldn't say that, but I do feel that because I work with children and I see the effect it has when it's not the right parenting, they go through so much and it's just not right. It's not fair. So I feel like the intention of a parent is vital. Like, they need to be aware of, is this going to scar my child, or is it going to uplift them and make them a better person? You know what I mean? And I think that needs to be fundamentally the most important thought a parent has.
Totally agree with you. Karina, thank you so much for meeting with me today. It's been a real pleasure. It's been great to have a follow-up on the work that you've been doing since our first podcast. Congratulations on all that you're doing. You're making such a difference. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
I'm reachable through my website, karinacalver.com. I'm also on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, Vegan Love Coach. That's on Instagram. On Facebook, Karina Calver. And yeah, they can just drop me a message and I'm there.
If they want to find out about the Me Too seminars that are coming up, the Indian one or any future ones that you're having, how can they find them?
Okay, so we normally create an event on Facebook. So for the one that's coming up in March, we haven't got the event set up yet. It will be in due course. But again, if they want to know more details, just get in touch with me and I'll fill them in.
All those events are held at Meta, aren't they?
The next one too, yeah. It is at Meta, yeah.
Great venue, isn't it?
Yeah, it is perfect.
Okay, thanks so much, Karina. It's great to see you again.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely to be here.
If you need support with any of the issues discussed in this podcast, please contact your local crisis line or lifeline. You can see your local GP or a counselling service offered in your area. And if you're in Hong Kong and you'd like to contact the Samaritans 24-hour hotline, please call 2896 0000. There may also be Me Too campaign support groups running in your area. Hi Confidants, I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.